It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there. All right, real quick, y'all know I don't interrupt before, but I just got to let you know, my apologies in advance. I had the volume not muted on my side while I was recording, so I got a couple phone calls, and I tried to go back and re-record over, but I didn't want to re-record the entire 2 hours. So throughout this, you may hear some sounds and notifications. Hopefully you don't hear me sniffling or anything like that in the background, but I got the show for y'all anyway. All right, so stay tuned, enjoy it, and I'll see y'all at the end.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching America First. My name is Nicholas J. Fuentes. We have a great show for you tonight. Very excited to be back here with you tonight on Friday. We have a lot to talk about, lots to get into. Big show, huge show. Our featured story, we're talking all about the brand new national defense strategy. I've been waiting for this one for a long time, actually. Apparently, it was authored by Elbridge Colby, grandson of the William Colby, former CIA director. And it's been in the works for a long time. There's been a lot of discussion about it. It actually came early, or was supposed to come earlier. Came a little bit later. But we finally have it, the National Defense Strategy. This lays out basically what our foreign policy strategic doctrine is for the United States. And I got to tell you, it's pretty good. It's about 33 pages, and I was pleasantly surprised by what was in it. It is a complete America First overhaul, and specifically the contents of the strategy on Europe, on the border, exceeded expectations. It talks about how Europe is undergoing a civilizational crisis, loss of confidence and identity, death due to mass migration, lack of free speech and political liberty, among other things. So we officially have a U.S. strategic doctrine that is acknowledging white genocide. Credit where it's due. Credit where it is due. I'm not a Trump fan at all, and I didn't vote for Trump, and I've been critical, but this is a very solid document. This is the first formal document I think I've ever seen at this level from the United States government that not implicitly but explicitly acknowledges white genocide in Europe, which is huge. It continues and talks about a new Monroe Doctrine. Specifically, they're calling it the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which we've talked about on the show for a couple of years now. It's not really that new. Laura Richardson promulgated the original new Monroe Doctrine in 2023. But they're adding on to it. They're making it a part of the formal strategy. And the Trump corollary says they're going to focus on drug trafficking and mass migration and using the U.S. military to repel both drugs and people over the border. And it also calls for sharing the burden of the expense for collective security in Asia and Europe, something I'm very much in favor of. So we will work through it. We'll talk about the document. We'll break it down piece by piece. But it's very good. It's very positive. And I will add, this is something that was reported a couple of months ago. There's one subtlety in the document. For maybe the last 10 years, it would seem that Trump's foreign policy was full on a pivot to Asia and a focus on China and a focus on strategic rivalry with China, preparing for maybe a future military confrontation with China, specifically over Taiwan. And I think that's still very much a part of the doctrine. But there was rumors about this, and I think it's come to pass that this is a doctrine that's maybe even more than it's about China, it's about the Western Hemisphere. And it's about hemispheric security, hemispheric defense, which I really like because I'm a big believer that that's the future. It's not a question of racing forward to confront China. to project power. It's about rebuilding the United States and our hemispheric sphere of influence as a source to project power, because I think that's what people get wrong. We really need to rebuild America to even have the capacity to project power. People are talking about where we will project power and how we will project power. We first need to focus on production, wealth and production, which is the source of power, which we do not have. So we'll talk about that. We'll work through the national defense strategy. Interesting stuff. We're also going to talk tonight about some of the things Trump has been saying on immigration. And I'll grant you, like with the national defense strategy, it's good rhetoric. I've been very pleased with the rhetoric. Who could be unhappy right now? And I'm talking about his comments about Somalia and Somalians. Apparently today he posted on Truth Social a post criticizing the Hart-Celler Act, the 1965 Immigration Act, which got rid of the national origins quotas. Many people attribute the mass migration of non-white people into the United States to this bill. They say because prior to 1965, we could control where the immigrants were coming from, how many would be permitted into the country. And after 65, we got an infinite number of immigrants from the third world. 1990 is really when the volume became the problem. 65 is maybe qualitatively when it became a problem. And so Trump reposted this long post on Truth Social talking about the history of immigration policy and specifically laying the blame at the 1965 law. And I see everybody is celebrating this. Everybody is saying, isn't this terrific? This is the best thing ever. I love what Trump has been saying. And I have to be honest, this is a strategy that we've seen a million times before. And we've talked about it all week. I think I talked about it Monday, Tuesday, with regard to Somalia. This is a very concerted and deliberate slop offensive. We are in a full-on slop siege, slop offensive. Slop is being thrown over the city walls onto everybody. And I can't believe people are falling for it all over again. It's no different than during the RNC last year when everybody held up those signs that said mass deportations. And any time that Trump said something contradictory, people pointed at the slop. So when Trump said, we're going to staple green cards to diplomas, people said, yeah, but look at the slop. Look at the placards, the signs. And I feel like that's happening all over again. Here we are. We're a year into the presidency. It is a complete disaster. Everything is in the garbage. Everything sucks. The polling, the favorability, generic ballot, the economy, the foreign policy. It's all terrible. And here we go again. When things get bad, Trump is going to wheel out the dog shit. And now we're suddenly going to sound really hardcore and really severe on immigration. And now we're going to talk about white genocide. And now we're going to talk about Hart-Celler. And people are already saying, oh, problem solved. We're back. We're not back. We're not back until there are no Chinese students coming into America. We're not back until there's no H-1B visas being given to Indians. We're not back until we stop protecting illegal immigrants that are working on farms, construction sites, and in hospitality. As long as that is going on, and we're not getting mass deportations, then frankly, who fucking cares what Trump says on Truth Social or what he says in a press conference? It does not matter if he's not following up, if he's not following through with actual policy. So we'll talk about that too. Should be a pretty good show. It's been sort of a slow week. There's not a lot happening, I got to be honest. And it's times like these, I get in kind of a rut and I feel like, is it me? Am I out of things to say? But then I go, no, it's not me. There's nothing happening. I'm on Twitter all day. I'm on Twitter all day doom scrolling. I'm reading the Washington Post, the New York Times. Excuse me, I'm on 4chan, I'm on Axios, and it's like, there's nothing. And then something happens and I get animated again. But anyway, sort of a slow night, but we'll try to make something out of it. Before we get into it, I want to remind you to smash the follow button here on Rumble. Smash the like button, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about the show. Big collaboration coming up next week. I'm getting ready to face Piers Morgan on Monday morning. Monday morning, I'll be with Piers Morgan for 2 hours. And I don't think it will be live. I plan on recording it on my end for my safety and my security. But I'll be facing off with Piers Morgan on the Uncensored Show Monday morning. I'm anticipating it's going to be hostile. I won't call it an ambush because I know it's going to be hostile. I know it's going to be name-calling and interruptions and bad faith. And I haven't done a debate like that in a while, so I'm getting prepared. I'm getting ready. I'm getting in the right mental state. So that's coming up. I don't know when that will be released. I wish it were live. I don't think it is. And I don't know when it's going to come out, but that's Monday. Thursday, I'll be doing my annual stream with Richard Spencer. Very much looking forward to it. We had to postpone it a little bit because I just knew that if I did it, we talked about doing it in November, but I just know that if I did it right after Tucker, everybody would be on my case. So I had to do a bunch of stuff before I talked to him. So that'll be Thursday. And then we're heading towards the end of the year. We're getting into the home stretch. Generational run, 2025. What do they say on TikTok? At the end of the year, what do they say? The 2025. Well, I forget what they say after that on the TikTok edits. Has come to a close. The 2025 year, it's entering into the portfolio. And I don't think there's anything else after that. Well, I got some stuff planned in January, but I think that's it for December. So that is the schedule. With that out of the way, one other thing before we dive in. We got our update on Candace Owens. So yesterday I spent a lot of time talking about her and her ridiculous excuse. I'll catch you up to speed very quickly. So Turning Point USA, I have to be honest, by the way, they're losing. Total disaster for them. I don't even feel bad because Turning Point, they deserve this. But Turning Point USA puts out a statement on Wednesday, and they say that they're going to issue a formal response to all the conspiracy theories that they killed Charlie Kirk. And leading the charge on that is Candace Owens. Everybody on the internet and the ringleader is Candace Owens. They've all been saying that Turning Point killed Charlie Kirk in concert with Israel, France, the FBI, the Trump regime, Utah State Police, people in maroon shirts, the Egyptian military, the mole men, aliens, the Illuminati. They're all in league. They all killed Charlie Kirk. And so Turning Point put out a statement on Wednesday, and they said they'd be formally responding to all the allegations. They said they're going to host a live stream in Phoenix at their headquarters. And they invited Candace Owens to do the stream. And Candace said, oh, I agree 1,000 times with all the bells and whistles, 100%, name the time, name the place, we'll be there. I don't care about the details. And they came out yesterday and said, we're doing it on December 15th. And Candace replies, I can't do that day. I'm busy. And I called her out yesterday and said, you can't do that. That's totally ridiculous. You've been obsessed with this for 3 months. You have told people that you're having visions about it, dreams about it. The French are trying to kill you. The government is trying to silence you. Here is your opportunity on a silver platter. I said, you have to go. You owe it to your fans. You have to go. And all your questions, all your research, you have to present that to them. That's fair. It's fair to them. It's fair to you. It's fair to the audience for the sake of the truth. If they are a part of the conspiracy, then you have to interrogate them. You have to cross-examine the other side. They have the information. You have to extract it. And if they're hiding something, well, she would be the obvious choice to get that out of them. She's the one that's been leading the charge, doing the research. She's apparently the only one that cares enough to do it, so she says. So I believe, and I'm not her biggest fan, but I believe that she has to do it. Like, you have to. And not for my sake, but for the sake of the truth, for the sake of your fans, and for the sake of your credibility. I think it looks really ridiculous that she's going to back down without even a good excuse. And that's really what I'm getting at. So she says that yesterday, and Turning Point responds, and they say, look, we told you we're going to do this response. We said you could come. This is when we're having it. If you're not going to show up, then don't show up. That's fine. We'll do it without you. And she comes back and says, oh, well, you know, you tweeted that you're doing it at midnight and you didn't email me, and that's ridiculous. And she comes out with the follow-up today. She says, why can't she go? Get a load of this. Candace says she can't go to the stream because her husband told her she can't. The husband told her she's not allowed to go. This is why you can't have women in politics. I said it about Marjorie Greene like last week. It's because they are never accountable. They are never accountable. She is on her show Monday through Friday, bobbing her head and challenging everybody and fighting everybody and doing a show. And then she gets challenged. The ball is in her court. And what does she do? She defers to her husband. You can't have it both ways. You can't have a platform and the initiative and the audacity and the independence to call everybody out and be a political pundit and be ostensibly the leader of a movement, which I think she is at this point, but then defer to your husband, who's arguably not even a public figure anymore. Should not the buck stop with you? It's your words, your show, your credibility, your research, your reputation. You're going out and causing all these issues. You're going out and leading the fight, but the buck stops with your husband, who nobody even knows? Where's the accountability? And that's why everyone has a problem with women in general, but also women in politics. It's because they never take accountability. They want to be treated like men. They want to be respected like men. They want to lead and they want to educate like men. They want to tell everybody what time it is like a man would. But then when push comes to shove, and there's actually consequences or pushback for their actions, then it's never their fault. It's the men's fault. And especially conservative women can always play this card. Liberal women, maybe they have too much pride. Maybe they know it's inconsistent, but so-called traditional women, they can always do this. They can always fall back on, oh, me? I'm just a woman. I got to talk to my husband. Your husband? You are a YouTuber. You are a world-famous YouTuber and celebrity and political star. Oh, now you're a trad wife? So which is it? Because you can't have it both ways. And that's the problem with traditional conservative women that are extremely political like this. They want to go and wag their finger and give their opinion. They want to go and tell everybody what's up. But then again, the consequences come for them and then they transform. Oh, actually, I was being traditional this whole time. Really? Because if you're so traditional, then maybe your husband should be running the channel, not you. Maybe he should have the show. Last I checked, a society where women have to ask their husbands for permission to leave the house, that's a society where women are not lecturing and leading men and challenging men and talking like she talks about men. You can't have it all ways like that. So she says, I can't because my husband won't let me. It gets better. She says, my husband is having company in from out of town, from out of the country. Okay, so this is the queen of just asking questions, right? This is the queen of, there's no timestamps. That's weird. You asked me at midnight. That's weird. The Discord messages contain the word vehicle. That's weird. I'm just asking. So you can't go to Turning Point because your British husband told you can't because you're having company from out of the country? Who's the company? Is it his father? Is it his father, Lord Farmer, the British Lord, the commodities trader, the head of the Council of Jews and Christians in Britain? That Lord Farmer, is it that guy from out of town? One of the biggest boosters of the Tory party in the United Kingdom? And one of the major backers of Nigel Farage and Brexit? Is it that guy? Or is it John Mappin, the Scientologist with a Russian wife who apparently introduced you and your out-of-country husband, George? Who are the people that are coming from out of town preventing you from telling the truth? Is this part of the conspiracy? Candace, blink twice. Blink twice. If the British or the French are invading your household and they won't let you speak, you can't go because your husband won't let you because people from out of the country are coming into your home. I presume that's family, and your family's pretty spooked up. So who is that? Or is that not legitimate? Or am I attacking family now? And that's suddenly off limits. It just gets more and more ridiculous. And honestly, I saw some of the feedback yesterday. A lot of people disagree with me on this. And to them, I would just say, you. Seriously. I have so had it with the Candace fatigue. It is the most low IQ, stupidest, most idiotic political trend I have ever seen in 10 years of doing the show. I've never seen anything like it. And I just simply will not pander to or plead with or try to appeal to people that are not rational. The reflexive excuses.
Hello?
Totally irrational arguments. I won't do it. I am not going to pander. I'm not going to pretend any of that is legitimate. It's not. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And I don't think Candace Owens is smart. Bro. People say she's smart. I think she's dumb.
Thanks a lot, though.
I think she's a good talker, but I think she's dumb as they come. I think she doesn't know shit about anything. She doesn't know the first thing about history. She doesn't know the first thing about politics. She can barely pronounce half the words on her show if she didn't have a producer in her ear. I think she's a terrible conspiracy theorist. And I think her show is for women. I think her show is like daytime television for MAGA moms whose brains have been fried by QAnon and the collapse of credibility of the mainstream media. That's what I think about it. And I think it's disturbing, and I think it's scary, and I think it's an IQ filter. I think if you're falling for it, you're low IQ. And I think it's a sad state of affairs how many people are being filtered by this. And I'm not going to pander to them. That's not my target audience. My target demographic is not people that are totally insane. I'm watching her show today. She says, everybody in the audience is wearing a maroon t-shirt. What are we doing at this point? What are we doing here? You want to bring me a real conspiracy theory? Bring me a real conspiracy theory with evidence. There's a lot of them out there. October 7th, we have the evidence. They talk about 40 beheaded babies. We know the anatomy of exactly how that lie was created in real time. We know all about how the Israeli Defense Forces were killing people that were fleeing. We know all about how for years Israeli intelligence knew Hamas was planning something. That's a conspiracy that has evidence. That's a conspiracy that has legs. It has motive. It has culprit. It has clear evidence, factual. That's a real conspiracy. But this is psychosis. There's not a coherent theory at all. It apparently involves everybody. Ask these psychopaths who they think is to blame and what the motive is. They can't tell you. They say every Turning Point is in on it. Erica is in on it. Trump and Kash Patel and J.D. Vance and Emmanuel Macron and the government of France and Israel and Egypt they're all in on it. Thousands of people in 4 different governments got together and said, we're going to shoot Charlie Kirk. We're going to blame it on some 20-year-old kid. We're going to get him to turn himself in. For some reason, he went along with this. And for what purpose exactly? They didn't assassinate a head of state. They didn't assassinate a billionaire, an oligarch. They assassinated a youth leader. They assassinated the head of Students for Trump. For what exactly? Because $1 million went missing at Turning Point? They did this for $1 million, allegedly? Because of an audit of this organization? Why? Because Charlie was going to let Tucker Carlson speak at the event? Well, guess what? Tucker spoke at an event at Turning Point 3 weeks ago. So what? There isn't even any clear, defined. They don't even have the vaguest clue of what it is. Still, something about Egyptian military planes based on very dubious flight logs, people in maroon t-shirts. I think that's about all they have, pointing to everyone and anything, coming up with anything that sticks. And I think it's absolutely, I think she's a retard. I think her fans that eat this stuff up are retards. They have ready-made excuses for everything. And whether something is proven true or false, it all goes into the confirmation bias. It all vindicates the theory somehow, no matter what it is. And I will not be a party to it. I know that's not popular. I can tell. I can see that. People don't like it. I don't care. I think it's bullshit, and I'm not going to stand for it. And history will vindicate me, as it always does. You know, the reason I have the credibility I have, the reason I've been around for 10 years is because I'm always ahead of the curve. Whether ahead of the curve means being with the establishment or being with this nonsense, I'm always ahead of the curve. I told people not to vote for Trump. She told people to vote for Trump. I told people war in Iran was coming. That wasn't even on her radar. I was red-pilled about Jews and race 10 years ago. She didn't find out until 2 years ago, and she still doesn't have a clue on race. I was ahead of that stuff. I'm ahead of this. History will vindicate me, and I will hold it against everybody that said my credibility's compromised because of this. I will hold it against you with prejudice. I'm taking note of everybody that does that, and it's never going to be the same. And I have to say, credit to Tim Pool. I saw that Tim Pool has really been pushing back against this strongly, and I'm not a big fan of Tim Pool. We have our differences. He said a lot of nasty things about me, but I give him credit. I think it shows a lot of integrity. And I saw Ian Carroll came out today on a live stream pleading with me to join in on the conspiracy. Ian Carroll, the conspiracy theorist, he's making videos about the conspiracy behind Red Lobster, the conspiracy behind Applebee's, the conspiracy behind Burger King. He does a live stream tonight and says, where are you, Nick? We're all aligned on this against the Jews, and you are agreeing with Crowder and Tim Pool and everybody else. We need you. Why are you with them? And I would say with Ian Carroll, where's the evidence? What even is that? Everything other than evidence. They're going to say, well, Israel kills everybody else. Okay, people die all the time, actually. People die all the time, and there are a lot of school shootings and assassinations. This stuff happens with regularity. Was Israel behind Luigi Mangione? Why or why not? Was Israel behind the school shooting in Colorado that happened on the same day? Why or why not? Was Israel behind the shooting of Trump? Why or why not? I don't know if any of those people blamed Israel for the shooting of Trump. Was Israel behind the Las Vegas shooting? Why or why not? Because the heuristic seems to be Israel is behind literally everything. Literally everything. Not most things, not things we can demonstrate with evidence. No, they're behind literally everything. And if they're behind literally everything in the past, then it's safe to assume they're behind literally everything in the future. And that is ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. Why? Charlie Kirk was Israel's top guy. I don't know how much more clear you can make it. And here's a perfect example. Hey, Ian Carroll, why did you on September 7th of this year tweet at Charlie Kirk, "You're working for the Jews that killed Jesus"? On September 7th, 2025, you tweeted that Charlie Kirk is working for the Jews that killed Jesus. On September 11th, you were absolutely certain that Israel killed him because he was this close to telling the truth, and he died for it. So what changed in those 4 days exactly? What irrefutable proof did you get in those 4 days? On September 7th, you said Charlie Kirk is working for the Jews that killed Jesus. On September 11th, the day after he was killed, you were certain, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Israel killed him to silence him. How does that even happen? Before we had a suspect, before we knew any of the facts, any of it, you knew for sure they did it. So, do you have ESP? Are you omniscient? Do you have telepathy? I don't think so. This is a grift. This is a grift. It is intellectually lazy. It is dishonest. You are making assumptions that you cannot rationally make. And if you want to destroy your credibility, that's fine. If you want to destroy your credibility by blaming Israel for killing the #1 Israel defender in America, that is your business. But don't try to rope me into it and guilt me or whatever it is you're trying to do, saying, we're all on this side and you're over there. I've been over here, bro. Where were you? I've been over here. I was at Charlottesville, lest I remind you. Where were you in 2017? Were you at Burning Man? Sorry, were you in some commune in Portland? I was at Charlottesville in 2017. He goes, we're all over here fighting the good fight. You and who? You and Candace Owens, who was working at Daily Wire last year? You and Candace Owens, who was working at Daily Wire. You and Tucker Carlson, who was working at Fox News. In 2017, 10 years ago, I was at Charlottesville. In 2019, I led the Groyper War against Charlie Kirk, calling him an Israel shill. It is 2025. Nothing has changed. For 13 years, from the time Charlie founded Turning Point until today, that organization was owned by Israel and served Israel, and everyone knows that. In June of this year, Charlie texted Dinesh D'Souza and said, Nick Fuentes is vermin. We've been fighting him for 6 years. He's anti-Semitic. In August, he said, I'm anti-Semitic garbage and I need to be censored, and he would never debate me. That was in August. People want to point out, oh, well, he was leaning in the other direction. He wasn't leaning in the other direction. His right-hand man, Andrew Colvett, comes from Salem Media. Look at who's involved in Salem Media. It is a Christian Zionist outfit. It is in bed with Israel. You want to know how I know that? Melissa Straight used to work there. From Prager University. She also used to work for Unit 8200 in the IDF. That's where Andrew Colvett comes from, and he was Charlie Kirk's right-hand man. Charlie Kirk appointed Andrew Colvett to lead their struggle session about Israel after the Turning Point SAS conference in July. When Israel bombed Qatar in contravention of Trump's own foreign policy, who did Charlie Kirk invite on the show to do Hasbara and explain the party line? Ben Shapiro. While Charlie Kirk played devil's advocate, he lended his platform to Ben Shapiro to give Israel's position. And on Wednesday, the day he was shot, Charlie Kirk met with his rabbi to prepare him to defend Israel at Provo, as he was writing his forthcoming book about the Jewish Sabbath. And this is the guy that was martyred for fighting Israel? If you think that, I feel sorry for you. Because you are. Ian Carroll says, we're all over here. Where's our general? Where's our guy? I'm right here where I've always been, following the facts, following the money, looking at the information. That's what got me here, light years ahead of you, light years ahead of Candace, light years ahead of Tucker Carlson. Now all these interlopers are going to come in and tell us that our ideology is about Netanyahu and Israel's foreign policy and this kookery. No, sorry, absolutely not. That's totally ridiculous. So, I mean, I've just had it. I've absolutely had it. And the reason I've had it is because my opposition to world Jewry and Israel is rooted in absolute, uncontestable fact. We have the truth on our side. That's why we're winning. Because we are telling the truth about the historical antagonism between Jews and Europeans, between Jews and Christians. The theological, historical, racial, cultural, and political antagonisms between organized Jewry and the Christians, organized Jewry and Europeans. And the reason that we are winning that argument is because it's real, it's true. I can prove it, I can show you, I can name the names, I can show you the paper trail, the money. That is why we're winning. That is why all of this is raising the consciousness. When you go around with this kind of bullshit, it makes us look like idiots. And it is playing right into the hands of the Jews. It is playing right into the hands of Israel when we start to blame them for literally everything. When we get loose and sloppy. Because they can say, if you're wrong about this, what else are you wrong about? They can say, if you blame the Jews falsely for this, what else do you blame them falsely for? And I have the sneaking suspicion that maybe that's part of the program. If Candace Owens' husband is her boss, well, who is her boss? George Farmer. Do you know that Candace Owens' husband, who she claims is her boss, do you know that his father runs the Organization for Cooperation Between Christians and Jews in the United Kingdom? So if George Farmer is her boss, then what does that say about this entire thing? What is that all about? Do you know that Candace was introduced to her husband, George Farmer, by John Mappin, a Scientologist with a Russian wife from the United Kingdom, who hosted the launch of Turning Point UK in England? Yes, Candace was introduced to her husband at Turning Point UK 7 years ago. She was introduced to him by a Scientologist with a Russian wife who's a backer of Reform UK and Turning Point UK. They got married 10 days later over FaceTime, even though they never had a romantic excursion. Do you know that George Farmer was hired by Rebecca Mercer to run Parler? Rebecca Mercer also has a Russian husband. Over at Parler, Rebecca Mercer also backed Breitbart in the very beginning. Breitbart, which produced Milo Yiannopoulos. Breitbart, which produced Ben Shapiro. Breitbart, which was born in America but conceived in Israel, with Benjamin Netanyahu at its founding meeting, with Jim Hoft, with Steve Bannon, Andrew Breitbart. Did you know all that? So if Candace Owens' boss is her husband, who is her husband? Well, the husband seems like a spook. His dad is in the House of Lords and runs some weird Jew-Christian outfit. They're introduced by some weirdo billionaire who, by the way, another interesting fact about John Mappin. Do you know who John Mappin received his money from in a trust fund? Well, only the Mappin family, which is the official jeweler of the royal family. So the crown jewels of the British Empire are handled by the man that introduced Candace and her husband. And you all think that Candace is super interested in France. Why? Because it's a human interest story? You think Candace Owens is an anti-Semite now all of a sudden because she saw the light? Who the fuck are these people? None of these people are normal. Tucker Carlson's dad ran Voice of America, CIA propaganda outlet. Candace Owens' husband is the son of a British lord. They're introduced by the jeweler of the British royal crown. Her father-in-law runs Christians and Jews United in England. Actually, who the fuck are all these people? Who are these people with their foreign spouses? You know, that's actually not normal to marry someone from Europe. How many of you have wives or husbands from Europe? It's not normal. And why are all their spouses from other countries? Mercer, married to a Russian. Mappin, married to a Russian. Candace, married to a Brit. What is up with all that? And Candace was riding with Turning Point right up until she wasn't. They all were. Erica Kirk, who even is she? She's introduced to Charlie Kirk. They meet in Israel. What is that? So, you know, and by the way, Erica Kirk and Charlie, close friends of the Mappins, close friends of John Mappin and Irina Mappin, the Kazakh Russian wife. They talk every week, it says. Don't play with me. Don't tell, oh, we're all over here. We're all over here doing what? Being 10 years behind the ball? You're all over here, and you always will be over there. You're damn right, buddy. You're all over there, and you're all 5 years behind, just like you were 5 years ago and 5 years before that. You're all over there, and I'm all alone over here, 5 years ahead of everybody, light years ahead of everybody, standing alone like I always have. You're right, and I always will be. That's the difference between you and me. I don't wait for yesterday's news tomorrow. I'm tomorrow's news today. That's the difference. So you're right. I'm going to stay firmly over here. And in a year, when it all comes out that it was Tyler Robbins, that Israel had nothing to do with it, you'll be looking like an asshole all over again. Just like Candace Owens is saying, I regret telling people to vote for Trump. In a year, you'll all be saying, I regret saying and buying into all that. Because you people are followers. You're followers. And that's just true. That's what it is. That's how it's always been. I was ahead of the curve from the very beginning on the whole thing. And now people want to say, you got the $7,000. I'm sorry, you got red-pilled on Instagram Reels? By who? You got red-pilled on Instagram Reels this year? By who? That's right. So, anyway, so that's that. But we're going to move on. We're going to get into the news. It's just, you know, I can't believe it's like my credibility's called into question. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know who these people are, actually. I have no idea who Candace Owens is in her weirdo life. I got started at 18 years old doing a YouTube live stream. She got started 18 years old suing her white boyfriend for calling her a nigger in high school. Yeah, that's the difference between you and me. Don't try me. Don't play with me. You know, that cocky, narcissistic black woman thing, that might work on all those other white people. It doesn't work on a real from Chicago. It doesn't work on somebody like me. Okay? We don't play that here. You know, these people, they're all so, I don't even know what that is. They're all so credulous. They see some narcissistic black woman bobbing their head. They go, wow, oh my goodness, wow. I'm from the streets, buddy. I'm from the streets. I'm from the streets of LaGrange Park. How absolutely dare you? No, but anyway, we're going to move on. We're going to get into it, but it's true. I'm pissed off now. I'm putting it to bed. It's done. You're both, Turning Point is done. Candace Owens, her credibility's toast. I cannot wait. The defamation lawsuits, bring them forth. Bring them forth. The vindication. Cherish this moment. Like, please, hate on me now. Go ahead, cancel me. Go ahead, cancel me for saying this. It makes the vindication better next year. It always does. Been there. Done it. So anyway, okay, we are going to move on. We're going to get into our news. Our featured story We're going to talk all about the national defense strategy. I had to go off there a little bit only because, you know, the low IQ masses, they're like counting on you to be on the back foot. They're counting on you to say, so listen, guys, you know, I like what she's doing, but whatever. No, it's stupid. It's stupid and it's weird, and I'm not falling for it. I won't. I didn't fall for Trump. I'm not falling for this. This is a load of bullshit. You lost me. Egyptian planes, maroon t-shirts, beekeepers, Charlie talked to me in a dream. What is wrong with you people? Someone with balls needs to slap you idiots across your faces. You're watching a show of a stupid black woman saying, Charlie told me he was betrayed in my dream. And you idiots are saying, well, sometimes dreams are very powerful. You fucking idiot. What happened to you people? Seriously, we used to be the smart ones. Anti-Semitism used to be smart and ahead of the curve. If you were saying Jews did 9/11, Jews brought us into Iraq, you know, we know what we're talking about, we know the names and we know what's going on. And now you got all these stupid idiots watching the show saying, but Nick, Candace said that Charlie confessed to her in a dream. I don't even believe what I'm hearing when I hear that stuff. She goes on her show, I've been having visions of beekeepers all year. Oh my gosh, our ancestors would hate you. Do you know that our ancestors invented every field of knowledge? Ask Ricardo Duchesne. Our ancestors invented every field of knowledge. Plato would hate you. Aristotle would hate you. Da Vinci and Isaac Newton would hate you. We are becoming Negrofied. The Jews are right. We are becoming true Goyim if we believe in fucking bullshit superstition like that. It is literally like medieval peasant idiocy. Someone in the village said she had a dream. Oh, come on, guys. Seriously? It's anti-white. It's anti-white. It disgusts me. It disgusts me. It reminds me of, I used to work at UPS, and it was all black people there. They would get bussed in from Gary, Indiana, from the south side of Chicago, and they all believed in magic. They all, to a one, they all believed in magic. You know, we'd be in the trailers unloading the boxes, and we talk about everything and anything, and they all believed in magic and supernatural stuff. This is no different. Candace Owens is like any other black person that believes in magic, basically. And white people, credulous white people, are buying into it. I'm honestly disappointed in all of you. And when all of this gets exposed, when the whole thing gets revealed, I can't wait to feel the vindication. This might be the sweetest one yet. It might, because this is the most unpopular position I think I've ever taken. And I'm happy to do it every single time. I love it. So, anyway. Yeah, and I know I'm speaking for a lot of white people when I say this. It's like, I want to put on my Burger King crown and say, get this bitch off the plane, you know? When I look at Candace Owens, I say Burger King crown equipped. Burger King crown selected from inventory and equipped. And I'm saying, get this bitch off the plane. HH, like seriously, what are we doing here? Time to go now. It's finished, okay? I'm fatigued. I have fatigue. I can't have a narcissistic black woman bobbing her head in front of my face going full Karen. It's been 3 months. I can't take any more of that. I'm ready to call the police. I think she has a gun. 911, I think she has a gun. Help. It's horrible. So anyway, so that's that. But I do want to move on. I want to get into our featured story. The National Defense Strategist, boring stuff. I'm trying not to say the N-word for the sake of Patrick Bet-David. So that's why I'm not going to straight up call her that. I think I'd be in poor taste, but it's like, that's kind of, I'm like, it's what it is. It's what it is. And to see everybody standing her, it's just gross. It's like, we did not fight for 10 years for race realism and the JQ to now follow the lead of some black woman, some narcissistic black woman. Sorry, I'm not going to do it. I didn't fight this hard so we could fall in line behind Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm not going to do it to fall behind some woman. You know, what is even that now? No, you're canceled. I'm not doing that. But we're going to move on. Featured story. Finally, we are going to engage the featured story, the National Defense Strategy. This is much more boring by comparison, but we have to do it. So today, finally, the new National Defense Strategy was released by the Trump administration, came out a little early this year, and there were a lot of rumors about what would be contained in it that made me very excited to read it. Now, they said it would come as soon as November. It took a little longer than that, but early reports said that maybe the most notable detail about this strategy is that it deprioritizes China. So as Trump enters government for the second time, everybody anticipates that it will be a continuation of his first term, of Biden's term, where we are engaging in what Obama called the pivot to Asia, or what the prioritizers call prioritization. And what that means is we're going to shift all of our resources away from the Middle East, primarily, but also Europe, and towards the Pacific. And the reason being is that Russia is fundamentally a declining power. They have rebuilt their capabilities since the collapse of the Soviet Union, but because of their fertility crisis, because of other systemic problems, they are in decline. In the Middle East, we're winding down the war in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria. And so the big idea is that we now have to take all of our resources out of these theaters of conflict, and we have to prioritize shifting them over to the Pacific in preparation for a long-term strategic competition with China, specifically over Taiwan and this island chain defense strategy. We seek to contain China by building a chain of islands, Philippines, Taiwan, islands of Japan, where we contain China from accessing the Pacific Ocean without key critical choke points that are controlled by United States, projecting force from air bases and other military bases situated at strategic points across the different islands. That's the big idea. And so everybody anticipated that Trump is coming into a second term and we're going to get China hawks. Many of the donors are China hawks. Many of the Republicans have become China hawks. And so everybody thought Trump coming in is going to prioritize China over the other theaters, and we're going to be ramping up military production. We're going to deploy more assets into the region, and we're really going to get ready in the short term within this administration for a confrontation with China. 2027, they say, is the year. According to the Chinese Communist Party doctrine, they are preparing to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. That's the year. And so the United States is doing the same thing. We're getting ready to match and meet China, be able to deny them an invasion of Taiwan by that year. That was the idea. But the detail, which was reported a few months ago, is that, on the contrary, that is not going to be this strategy for this administration. This NDS document was written by Elbridge Colby, who was brought on in the policy side in the DOW earlier this year. And Elbridge Colby was thought to be one of the notable prioritizers in government. He was thought to be a notable China hawk. He's coming in and writing the document. And what they say about it is that actually we're prioritizing the Western Hemisphere over China. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on security in the Caribbean, in Central and South America, in asserting a new Monroe Doctrine, and denying China access to markets or infrastructure or political influence in Central and South America. And this is sort of a big surprise to everybody, not engaging primarily in Europe or the Middle East or even Asia, but in the Western Hemisphere. And now we finally have the NDS. That was some of the whispering about it. Now we actually have it. And I have to say, it exceeds all expectations. It's very positive. The doctrine lays out, first and foremost, that the strategy of the United States is America first. It says that everything we do is to prioritize American interests abroad. And that's the North Star, which is perfect. And then it works through the different regions. And it talks about Europe. And there's innovations in every region. In Europe, it says that the Europeans are in an existential crisis. This is huge. It says Europeans are going extinct because of mass migration, because of political censorship. It says that it encourages the rise of populist, far-right, anti-immigrant parties in Europe, like the AFD, like the National Rally in France, like Reform UK. And so this is maybe the first time I've seen in a government document at this level, it seems like an explicit acknowledgement of white genocide, because that's the whole formula, which is that non-white people are moving into Europe. They're outnumbering and replacing the native Europeans. And as a result, the countries are permanently altered. You bring in a different population, you get a different country, and it can't be undone. If the fertility rate of the natives goes down, and they're being hit with wave after wave of immigration, and those immigrants have a high fertility rate, on a long enough timeline, if this goes unchecked or uninterrupted, one day you're going to wake up and there'll be no Europeans and they are erased. And that's the language that is used in the paper. It says Europeans are facing an existential threat. It's a threat to the existence of Europeans. And they're facing erasure. They're going to be erased by immigration. But it goes further because, of course, this situation is sustained by a political arrangement. Have to keep in mind, all of this is a program. It is all a deliberate program and an artifice. And what I mean by that is immigration is not organic, it's a policy. This is not happening in a vacuum. This is not happening because it has to happen. Immigrants are being invited into Europe. They're being subsidized. They're being rescued and delivered into Europe. If a bunch of Africans get on a tiny boat and they go on the beach of Libya and they go 5 miles off the coast and start to drown, a European NGO will rescue those people and take them the rest of the way, like a ferry, to Italy or Spain and let them off on an island or on the mainland. I'm not making that up. That happens. They're being ferried over. In these other countries, they don't build walls. They don't try to stop them. And the African or Middle Eastern migrants, they move freely through the Schengen zone in search of better benefits. Many of them will go across the Mediterranean into Italy, and they'll travel all the way north through Italy, through Germany, into Denmark or Norway. Why? Because they have a more generous welfare state. So this is literally, they're delivering the immigrants. They're allowing them to come in. They're subsidizing the immigrants, subsidizing them with benefits, with welfare, putting them up in hotels as they rape and pillage, as they transform the society. And so what the Trump strategic doctrine gets right is that what is crucial for mass migration is political censorship. It has to be that way. It is liberal parties that are making this happen. Liberal, and by liberal, I mean small L liberal. Center-right and center-left parties have created a line of demarcation. The doctrine in Europe is that there is no alternative to liberalism. There is no alternative. The only governing ideology is liberalism. And the center-right and the center-left collude to keep the far right mostly, but also sometimes the far left out of power. And they collude to bring the immigrants in pursuant to the doctrine of liberalism. Take, for example, Giorgia Meloni in Italy. Giorgia Meloni is supposedly a right-wing prime minister. And it's a coalition of various right-wing parties. And although she has started to restrict irregular migration, she's bringing in hundreds of thousands, millions of legal immigrants in a working capacity. At the same time, she's making it harder for ethnic Italians to get citizenship. So if you're a third or fourth generation Italian living in Argentina or the United States, you can't any longer apply for citizenship. But if you're an African, you can very easily get citizenship now in Italy. That's under a center-right party. In Germany, the Christian Democrats are working with the left to keep AfD from getting any power. They would rather work with liberals, in some cases socialists, than work with the far-right anti-immigrant party. It happens in France. It happens in all these countries. And so the strategic doctrine says Europe is being erased. It's going extinct because of mass migration. And the mass migration is allowed because of these political parties that maintain their hegemony by censoring. They ban the AfD from the country. They ban the leaders of the party. They arrest guys like Dries van Langenhoven in Belgium. This guy is in a group chat where people are posting edgy memes. They put him in jail for a year. This is what they do. And the Trump national security doctrine says we need to undo the censorship, we need to encourage the far-right parties, and we need to reverse the immigration. That's huge. This is what it says about it in the Associated Press. I'll just go through it. It says, quote, economic stagnation in Europe is eclipsed by the real and more stark prospect of civilizational erasure, says the strategy document. The U.S. suggests that Europe is being enfeebled by immigration policies, declining birth rates, censorship of free speech and suppression of political opposition, and a loss of national identity and self-confidence. It says, should present trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. As such, it is far from obvious whether certain European countries will have economies and militaries strong enough to remain reliable allies. So this is great. And you can say whatever you want about whether there will be follow-through or not, but this is excellent. This is an explicit acknowledgement of white genocide from the highest level. And it has every ingredient. Like I said, whites are going extinct. It's birth rates, it's mass migration, it's censorship, it's political suppression. And in 20 years, it's going to be unrecognizable. And it includes in there, that's a bigger problem than their economic stagnation. Because that's what all the headlines from the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times will say. They'll talk about the deindustrialization of Germany. They'll talk about Europe lagging behind the United States in growth since the pandemic. But the bigger issue, as this says, what eclipses that is that they're dying. So that's great. It also says about Russia. It says that we seek to end the war in Ukraine for obvious reasons. But what's more, it says they seek a strategic partnership with Russia after the war. And that's also consistent with what Trump said in 2015, which is we should get along with Russia. And I love that about the Trump administration. I don't trust Russia. On some level, I don't like Russia. And I've been kind of red-pilled on Russia over the years. I used to think it was based and edgy to say, we're pro-Russia, I don't feel like that anymore. And that's based on things that I've seen and things I've learned. With that being said, I do think that it is good strategy for us to try to pry Russia away from China. Russia and China don't like each other. They don't trust each other. They're not natural allies. And if they were working together more effectively, they would pose a serious threat to the United States. Russia's sort of amateurish. China's very strong. If they were really on the same page, it would be a nightmare scenario for us. They'd be a much more potent threat, but they don't really like each other. And so the Trump strategy says we're going to build a security architecture that includes Russia, and we're going to cooperate with Russia. And I don't know that Russia's necessarily going to be an ally, but it would behoove us to not ostracize Russia and make them a pariah. I don't think it's possible, and it's not a good idea. This is what it says about that. The United States is seeking to broker an end to Russia's 4-year-old war in Ukraine. The document makes clear the U.S. wants to improve its relationship with Russia and that ending the war is a core U.S. interest to reestablish strategic stability with Russia, which I think is great. On Latin America, it talks about the Monroe Doctrine. This is something we've discussed on the show for years, something I'm actually supportive of in the context of our intervention in Venezuela and Trump's gunboat diplomacy against Panama, taking back control of the canal, backing pro-U.S. regimes like Milei in Argentina, who I don't necessarily like, but maybe I can see the big picture. And Milei, or excuse me, what is his name in El Salvador again? It totally escapes me right now. I forget for the time being. But El Salvador, in Ecuador and Bolivia, we have pro-U.S. governments over there. I've been very supportive of that over the years because there is a legitimate Cold War going on with China. And over the past 10 years, they have been trying to displace us, specifically in bilateral trade with those countries and by investing in those countries' infrastructure. Leasing ports, leasing all kinds of other transportation infrastructure, potential dual-use commercial infrastructure, like satellite dishes, among other things. And this national defense strategy says that there's going to be a Trump corollary to the new Monroe Doctrine. It says you have the old Monroe Doctrine, which says we're not going to let Europe interfere in the Western Hemisphere. It says the new Monroe Doctrine will make sure that no great power comes into the Western Hemisphere. It says the Trump corollary is that we're going to use the military to beat back immigration and drug trafficking. We're going to use the military to go in and go down to the border in Mexico, but also maybe engage inside Mexico or in Colombia or other countries with the U.S. military to fight the drug traffickers. And this is what it says, again, in the Associated Press. It says, quote, the operations in Venezuela are part of what the national security strategy lays out as a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. The 1823 Monroe Doctrine was originally aimed at opposing any European meddling in the Western Hemisphere and was used to justify U.S. military intervention in Latin America. Trump's strategy document says it aims to combat drug trafficking and control migration. That means, for instance, targeted deployments to secure the border, defeat cartels, including, where necessary, the use of lethal force to replace the failed law enforcement-only strategy of the last several decades. So this is great, too. Again, I am broadly supportive of this, and I'll break this down very simply. So the foundation of what we call geopolitics, the modern study of geography, and you could call it foreign policy, grand strategy, geostrategy, all of these fields of knowledge are based on a couple of ideas. They're called the Heartland theory and the Rimland theory. The Heartland theory by Mackinder and the Rimland theory by Spikeman. And what these two different theories say is that when you look at a map of the world, what you see is one giant world island, and that is the Eurasian African continent. When you look at a map of the whole world stretched out, you see one supermassive landmass, which includes Europe, Asia, and Africa, and then a giant ocean. And under this idea, North America and South America are considered big islands, like Australia. Why is that? Because if one country or one empire was able to marshal the resources of the Eurasian African landmass, like, say, for example, the Mongols, the Russians, what the Nazis dreamt of at one point, if one terrestrial empire, a land-based empire, were to control the resources in Europe, the resources in Asia, the resources in Africa, and I'm talking oil, critical minerals, fertile soil, like the breadbasket of Europe, the Baku oil fields, the Persian Gulf, the critical minerals in China and Africa. If one country can control all of that, that empire would be undefeatable, unbeatable. And there are more resources in Eurasia, Africa than in North and South America. So it says that when you look at the foundation of geopolitics, regimes are going to try to get power in the middle of the Eurasian African continent. It says the key to unlocking the heartland is in Eastern Europe, and it's in the Middle East, because that's the gateway between the three continents. So whoever can control that heartland, that's why they call it the heartland thesis, whoever can control the heartland of the Eurasian African landmass will then project power across it. They'll control all those resources. They'll dominate the globe. Spikeman comes along a little bit later and adds on to this, and he says, well, realistically, the Rimland plays a much more important role. And what he calls the Rimland is the coastal region that cuts through the Eurasian African landmass. So the Mediterranean Sea, the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, the Bahr al-Mandeb, the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, all the way through to the South and East China Sea. And the reason that Spikeman says that the Rimland, they call it the Rimland because it's the rim of the heartland. He says the Rimland is important is because goods travel across naval routes. They travel across sea routes. And so whoever can control those critical choke points, where all the commerce is actually happening, where those resources are exchanged, it's not going to be by rail, it's going to be by sea. And if it's by sea, it's going to be through that corridor. It's going to be from the Eastern Med to the Red Sea, to the Indian Ocean, to the China Sea. And that's where goods are going to be trafficked, and that is actually going to be the wealth of the heartland. And so whoever can control the Rimland is actually going to be the most powerful. And anyway, that's the foundation of geopolitics. And when you look at the Western Hemisphere, where does that leave us? Well, the idea is that we are sort of recused from that whole struggle. We don't have to deal with all of that because we're not on that landmass. So over there, the Soviet Union is fighting Nazi Germany to dominate that territory. That's really what that battle was about. The Soviet Union versus Nazi Germany over battle for the heartland. And in other times, Napoleon battled Russia for control of the heartland. And we've seen that battle play out over and over again. It's a very vicious jockeying for control in that territory. And the historic idea of the United States is that we don't go in search of monsters to destroy over there. We will not be entangled in alliances over there because we don't have to. Because we enjoy splendid isolation. We're separated by the oceans. So if the heartland power can't touch us, and if there's a balance of power over there, we can really recuse ourselves from that conflict because we're insulated from any other major great power by the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. We're not threatened by Britain, Germany, France, Russia, China. We're not threatened by any of the great powers because they can't invade us. So it's not our problem. We had to intervene during the Cold War because it looked like the Soviet Union might take control of everything, and then you'd have that asymmetry. Going forward into the 21st century, we see that geopolitics has reactivated in the Eurasian African landmass. You could say that there's something like a balancing, a multipolarity between Europe, Russia, China, and a series of middle powers in the middle. You've got, and figuratively and literally, middle in terms of their capabilities, and literally because of where they're situated geographically. You've got a European bloc, you've got Russia, you've got China. These are the great empires. They're fighting it out. And in the middle, you've got some middle-tier countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, Ethiopia, South Africa, trying to play the different powers off of each other. So multipolarity, balance of powers back in effect. So it sort of maybe suggests where I'm going with this. Where does that leave the United States? Well, the United States, like it did in the Cold War, is trying to keep the balance in the heartland. But at the same time, the true source of our power, the true source of our security, is that we control this hemisphere. That's the true source of America's security and its power, is that As long as we control this side of the world, we're safe. As long as great powers don't try to gain a foothold in Central and South America, like, for example, China. In the old days, it was Spain, it was England, it was France. Now those countries are marginal. Now China is trying to build ports and a maritime empire over here on the Pacific coast. The United States says we're reasserting the Monroe Doctrine. We're going to kick out China. And that makes us secure from a defensive point of view because we won't have infrastructure that's being used by China against us. They can't take control of the Panama Canal. They can't build the deepwater port in Ecuador. They can't take control of radar satellite dishes in Argentina. They can't control the Paraná River over there. They can't use Cuba or Venezuela as a base of operations. So one, there's a defensive benefit. And then two, if we're able to effectively govern the Western Hemisphere, then we can control the resources of the Western Hemisphere. The Western Hemisphere has resources. It has lithium in Bolivia, in Chile, in Argentina. It has oil in Canada, in the United States, in Venezuela. It has critical minerals in the United States, in Canada, in South America. And so if we could build something like, who knows, not NAFTA necessarily, but if we could build on the relationship between Canada, Mexico, these other countries in the Western Hemisphere, if we worry about that first, that could be the source of power to project against China. In other words, instead of fighting for overseas colonies, basically, instead of going over 100 kilometers off of China's coast and fighting for control of Taiwan, which is far closer to China than it is to us. We're going to fight a war on the other side of the Pacific, and we're going to fight in Ukraine on the other side of the Atlantic, and we're going to fight in Iran, which is on the opposite side of the globe. It says we're just going to focus on our own territory. We're going to turn the Western Hemisphere into an extractive enterprise. And we're going to have something like hemispheric defense, hemispheric industry, hemispheric common market, let's say. And with no influence from China, if we have our go at it, if we have final say, that will make us a very rich and powerful country. And this is why Trump flirts with Greenland, Canada, annexing those territories. This is why he wants to deploy special forces in Mexico. This is why Rubio wants to trawl through the Caribbean in Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. This is why they're backing these regimes in Honduras, El Salvador, Bolivia, Argentina, pursuing rapprochement in Brazil. If we can get everybody on side, if we can incorporate everybody into the hemispheric defense alliance, if we're all pointed in the same direction, then the United States can become more self-sufficient. Our supply chains and supply routes will be closer to home. And that will make all of those things more defensible if we don't have to get them from the Pacific or even from the Atlantic for that matter. So I really support that. And I would add onto that whole idea, on top of that, it's very important that they're focusing on immigration as well, because that is the biggest national security threat. And I'm glad it's being acknowledged as such. They say, yes, Europe is facing economic decline, and they're not able to hold up their share of the burden to challenge Russia. It says, but bigger than that, immigration is killing them. And it says the same in the United States. Bigger than even the Monroe Doctrine, we have to deploy the military against the immigrants because we're being invaded, and it's creating social dysfunction, social instability, political instability. It's making the country influenceable by China. These are exploitable vulnerabilities that are being created. So I'm glad that's being recognized as such. Finally, it addresses the Middle East and China. It says that we're leaving the Middle East and we're preparing for war in Taiwan. This is what it says about that. It says, quote, the U.S. strategy should abandon America's misguided experiment with hectoring nations in the Middle East, especially monarchies in the Gulf, about their traditions and forms of government. brought to you by Qatar, by the way. That little line, the United States will stop bothering all those monarchies and their form of government and their traditions, like killing journalists. And that line was paid for by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. But I'm fine with it. It goes on. It says, meanwhile, as the U.S. under Trump has overturned decades of free trade policy with sweeping global tariffs, its ties with China have been a prime focus. America under Trump is seeking to rebalance the U.S.-China relationship while also countering Beijing's aggressive stance toward Taiwan, according to the document. The Trump administration wants to prevent a war over Taiwan, the self-governing island that Beijing claims and to which U.S. military is obligated by its own laws to support militarily by maintaining a military advantage over China. But the U.S. wants allies in the region to do more to push back against Chinese pressure and contribute more to their defense, which is pretty standard. That's par for the course. So that all sounds great. The whole national defense strategy, I haven't read it in its entirety yet, but I read through the key points. I read the bullet points, and it sounds about as good as it gets. This is what an America First foreign policy looks like. If it were me, I would add in more about industrial policy, but this sounds good to me. A strategic balance with Russia, or what did it say? Strategic stability with Russia. Focusing on the Western Hemisphere, getting out of the Middle East, focusing on China, addressing the immigration crisis in Europe, because the European economies, they are our closest allies. Forget Israel. Our closest allies are Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Italy, Canada. These are our biggest allies. Australia, these are our closest allies. And if these countries fall to Africans and Muslims, they're not going to be good allies. They're not going to be worthwhile to have because there's no capacity for rebirth. There's no capacity that they'll ever be able to sustain an advanced industrial economy, and they won't be loyal to us. So this is our civilization. It's a civilization. I don't agree with Samuel Huntington on everything, but Huntington sort of had it right when he said it's about a clash of civilizations, and it's going to be European civilization against Sino civilization. And to the extent that Europe is falling due to migration, we're losing our civilization. And our civilization is the basis of our ability to project power. It's not just a cultural thing. Being able to count on the industrial might of Germany, being able to count on the economic might of Western Europe, that is rolled into our ability to project power against China and other countries. So it is bad for us in every way that Europe should fall, and deterring immigration into Europe should be a part of our national defense. So that's perfect. And the only rub, of course, is whether any of this is actually going to become policy. It's a good document, and I commend its authors, but the question is, what is going to be the reality? Will we be able to leave the Middle East? Will Israel let us? Will we be able to bring an end to the war in Russia? Doesn't seem likely, at least not anytime soon. And are we willing to use our political might to rescue Europe? I think that should be a priority. Why is that not a priority? I see over in Europe, you have people being arrested for saying bad words. You have political parties being suppressed. There's countless examples of this. What is the administration doing about it? They're actually doing the opposite. I know a lot of European nationals that are not allowed into the United States because they criticize Israel. And so they're being denied visas. And I know multiple people like this, actually. So not only are they not helping the dissidents there, they're hurting them. So, as always, the question with this administration is, will there be follow-through? The policy as articulated in the paperwork is great. It's always great. The executive orders, the rhetoric, all that stuff is always pretty good. The follow-through is never there. And what we get instead is giving Israel $80 billion, going to war against Iran. The war in Russia drags on forever. We're never catching up with China. We don't move quickly enough. And even in the Western Hemisphere, it is true the U.S. military is deployed to the border. They are effectively deterring immigration. But at what point do you get a Democratic administration that just takes them all away? They need to build a wall. They need to create a permanent solution to immigration, either legislatively, physically, militarily. It needs to change. So that's the open-ended part. I commend the authors of this, Elbridge Colby. Sorry we doubted you. Great paper, but now we need to see the implementation. So that's that. We're going to move on. We'll take a look at our super chats. That's the National Defense Strategy. I don't know how interesting that is to you guys, but it's important stuff, and I've been waiting for that for a long time. We're going to dive in. We'll take a look here. Let's see. Let's see what you guys have to say.
All right, let's get into it. We're back. More beef between Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes. As much as I don't like it, you know, obviously I rock with Nick. I rock with Candace. So I don't know. These petty beefs, it seems like there's something deep rooted there, resentment. And I do think that a lot of this is based on when Nick went on Candace Owens' show. I do think that Nick tried to extend good faith and go into it with good intentions of him and Candace having a conversation, getting along, because I see this being the case with Nick, with a lot of people that have interviewed him, who they've just, you know, talked badly about each other. Nick usually goes into it, or I can say always. I don't recall a situation where he didn't go into the conversation with good faith, trying to have a respectful conversation, regardless of what he said previously about the person or what that person has said previously about Nick. When Nick went on Candace's show, not sure if all y'all remember or if this was the takeaway that y'all had, but it did seem like Candace was only bringing Nick on to kind of appease being called out for not bringing Nick on and bringing all these other people on, even though Nick was highly requested. I think that's why Candace did it. I don't think Candace was bringing Nick on to improve the relationship between those two or to have a conversation that would make Nick look good. I think it was to bring him on, kind of make him look as bad as possible without looking like a B. You know, it's like Candace was like, okay, I'm going to bring him on. I want this to benefit me, so I'm going to put it behind the paywall because I want to get paid off of it. I want Nick to come on and I want to be seen as superior to him. I want people looking at it to walk away saying like, I'm on this level, Nick is on this level. So I don't think that it was the same generosity or good faith extended from Candace's end to Nick that it was from Nick to Candace. So I do think that Nick is really offended by that. I think Nick believes that Candace tried to make him look silly. I know that during the interview, Nick didn't like Candace calling him out or even addressing the fact, you know, him, what are you going to get married? Oh, are you going to have kids? Are you going to have a family? And Nick kind of, you could tell his response was like, yo, why are you even asking me that? Like, as a woman, like, why are you even pressing me on these things? So you can see the dynamics between those two. And I do feel Nick, as far as calling Candace out. Now, I don't know if this is the case. I'm just going off of Nick. So you all listening may have a bit more information than me on this. But if Candace Owens is saying that now she's not going on because of her husband or because of, and I did hear that it's her husband's birthday coming up. I just think that Candace, and I said this on yesterday's show, Candace put herself in this position. Candace put herself in this position to where she's jumping out the window saying like, oh yeah, anytime, any place, name the time and place. Well, when you say that and people name a time and place, even though it is an inconvenient time because it's the time of your show, perhaps, I don't know. Some people may look at that as convenient or not convenient, neither here nor there. When you have that type of energy, other than saying yes, okay, book my flight, or I'll book the flight, it's going to come across like you're trying to wiggle out of something or you're shifting the energy of what you initially had, which is like, yo, call me, like, you can come through. We could fight anytime. We could fight anytime. All right, I'm coming through at this time. Well, not at that time because I really think that this is perhaps Candace's husband intervening in a different way. Perhaps he sees what a lot of us see. Perhaps he sees what I'm sure Candace is seeing now. What is she going to say when she gets up there in front of Turning Point USA? If Candace Owens goes to Turning Point USA, we said this yesterday. She's a journalist. She's not a debater. She's not debating based on policies or based on why she believes her strategy is better than somebody else. She's not debating on history. She's debating on things that, or she's not debating. She's having a discussion and trying to get information on her friend's assassination. So based on the things that have been presented to us, the public, the things that some Turning Point USA people have put out there, it's not consistent. It doesn't add up. So Candace, what has she done? She's responded to those things. So it's reactionary. So everything that they now tell her on the show, it's going to take her time to do research to respond to that. She's not responding based on her opinion. They're responding based on what Turning Point USA people are going to say. And she doesn't know that. And it's going to take her time to validate the things that she's saying. Other than that, like, what would she be standing on? So I think Candace put herself in this position. I really do. It resonated when Nick said about Candace. He said that, women want to be treated like men, lead like men, educate like men. But then when push comes to shove, when there's consequences for their actions, there's never any level of accountability. It's never their fault. And this reminded me of, and I may have mentioned it on yesterday's show, but what Kevin Samuels used to talk about, R.I.P. Unc. He used to say that women want the power of men, the privilege of women, and the accountability of children. Now, I'm not saying at all that applies to what Candace is doing. However, when she approaches with this aggressive energy, and she actually did this in an interview with Nick, which is probably why he's kind of pissed off, where she tried to use this passive aggressive energy almost when she was asking him about his relationships, his dating life. And it didn't come across in the way that she was trying to. It seemed like, okay, now I'm going to play this role. And perhaps now that I'm even saying this, and I know I'm all over the place, perhaps I'm seeing more of this with Candace's show. I don't watch Candace's show that often. However, I like Candace, but I don't really necessarily enjoy the show to watch it every day. It's not for me. Perhaps Nick is right when he says, it's more daytime television for women. It's a bit, harder for me to watch. I don't want to say it's boring, but it's not necessarily intriguing for me. Like, I'm looking for more quick points, elaborate conversations on particular topics, not necessarily, a whole hour of, Brigitte Macron, even though I think that may be important journalism for her to do. I'm not necessarily interested in it, just being real. So when Nick is discussing Candace, or what I was talking about before, Candace backtracking and, now saying, oh, because of her husband, she can't have these conversations. It is very convenient. It is very convenient on her part, or saying that she can't go to Turning Point USA. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say not having this conversation. I lost my train of thought, was trying to catch it there. But yeah, I'm just over it. I'm over the whole Candace and Nick. Y'all figure y'all stuff out, man. We keep getting dragged into this. I feel like you ever had friends and they got certain issues with certain people and you feel like you keep getting dragged into it, but you cool with the other person. You're not as cool with the other person as you cool with this person, maybe, but like you just feel like you keep getting dragged into it. You may lean one way or lean another way, but it's like, yo, I'm still cool with that person. Like, why y'all gotta have beef over some pettiness? But and perhaps this can all be solved with a conversation between those two. Perhaps one of them feels like the other owes them an apology. I don't know what it is, but I don't know where it's going. However, another point that I agree strongly with Nick on is that, Ian Carroll's asking him now, come on board, get on board with the movement. Where's our leader? This is the stance against the Jewish people. That's what Nick said. I don't know if that's what Ian Carroll actually said, but where was that energy when Charlie Kirk was bullying? And I'm not going to say bullying Nick in that way, but when you're the person that works with the establishment, you take the donor money. You're the one that's going to say the politically correct things. And that's how I look at Charlie Kirk, right? He's going to appease his donors. He's that person. He's the one with the platform. He's the one that works with the establishment. That's him. If you're going to, and take away the bullying, but maybe y'all will understand what I'm saying, where I think a lot of these people have tried to bully Nick, like a Ben Shapiro, which they know that they have access to platforms just based on the, or more than Nick, just based on the fact that Nick is censored from a lot of these platforms. So it's like he can't even get his get back at the same level that they can. But now, because he's just so big, and now he's getting featured on a lot of these shows where he previously wasn't, now he can have that voice where I mean, could you imagine if he had a YouTube channel, how big his voice would be? But neither here nor there. Sometimes, I guess, when I'm thinking back to supply and demand, right? Because there's less of a supply, maybe there's a greater demand. So maybe it has now been working in Nick's favor. But Ian Carroll, where was this energy when Charlie Kirk was alive and telling Charlie Kirk, hey, ease up on Nick. He's on our team. Like, get on board with it. Where was that energy? So I do feel Nick when it comes to now he's the one that has to play peace, or he's the one that has to come over to their side. And to Nick's point, he has been ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff. He has been ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff. He was pointing out, and I wasn't even watching Nick at the time, but going back to a lot of his videos, and when I first started, I would have never thought that he wasn't rocking with Trump this past election. I would have never thought that he was telling people he's not voting and perhaps they shouldn't vote for Trump. Meanwhile, the Candace Owens of the world, she was telling people to vote for Trump. She was supporting Trump. I ended up voting for Trump. And one of the people that, I'm not going to say influenced me to, but Candace Owens, I respect her opinion in a lot of these situations, or respect her journalism, whatever you would call it, her contributions in the content space, as well as other people that are now questioning Trump, like a Dave Smith, even like a Theo Vaughn. Like, these are people that I respected the fact that they were willing to have certain stances at different times that were not necessarily the popular stance. But now we're in this position where we have a Nick Fuentes, and Nick Fuentes has definitely not taken the popular stance, because he was the one calling out, like, nah, I don't like Trump's stance on a lot of these things. I don't like that he hasn't mentioned, America First as much. I don't like that he's taking money from all of these Jewish billionaires. I don't like that. Nick was calling this stuff out ahead of time. So Nick does have a point where it's like, nah, I don't need to come get on page with y'all. Y'all need to get on my page. Y'all need to come over here on this side. So I do understand that in every aspect, because think about it. It's not just about voting for Trump. Nick said something similar. He said he was ahead of the curve in calling out the war in Iran. He was ahead of the curve in Candace Owens, just over the last couple of years, having this awakening when it comes to Israel, Zionism, and perhaps certain aspects of the Jewish culture. Nick was ahead of the curve in a lot of these areas. So you got to give credit where credit is due. So I just, that was the majority of the first part of the show, talking about Candace Owens, then getting into Ian Carroll and the conversations around those things. Like, these are the petty things that we end up talking about more than the actual important things. So this is why, and perhaps this is why I'm saying it's petty. Maybe it's not really petty. I'm not trying to delegitimize anything that Nick is saying as far as how he's feeling towards Candace, or how he believes that what Candace is doing, similar to like a Tim Pool, they think that it's doing more destruction than it is positive for politics in America. And I believe Tim Pool's more so focused on Candace Owens and her contributions breaking up the Republican Party, the conservative side. So I get it. I get it. I just hate that we end up focusing on these things and focusing on the pettiness, and the egos get involved when you're beefing with somebody. And I think we'll all acknowledge that Candace and Nick have a large ego, and that may factor into, them continuing this Twitter beef or YouTube beef back and forth, however you want to call it. So hopefully they can get that squared away. But if they don't, I'm sure we'll all continue to listen. But let's transition into the next phase. Yeah, I'll leave it at there. One thing, matter of fact, one thing that I need to look into, And I was Googling this, or matter of fact, I didn't Google. I ended up looking up something else as far as like the Heartland, and we'll talk about that in a second. But one thing that I need to look up is, did Nick say that Candace Owens met her husband and then like 10 days later they got married on like Zoom or something like that? I don't know if that's the case, but that's definitely something to look into. It just makes you wonder. It just makes you wonder. Even when Nick was on the show saying, like, who are these people? I don't know who these people are. And a few shows ago, he was talking about Tucker Carlson in a similar way, where he's like, I don't know what Tucker is. If he went back to the hills in Maine or his log cabin in Maine and took off like his skin and there was a reptile under there. He said something like that, a serpent. I don't know what he said. But his point is that I don't know these people and their intentions. I don't know these people and what their intentions are. And I can see that happening more and more, where in this day and age, especially when everybody can have a voice and anybody can have a YouTube channel and can grow, it almost makes you wonder, like, how did this person get here? What are their intentions? Similar to how we look at like a JD Vance, where it's like, where did JD Vance come from? He's working with Peter Thiel. Next thing you know, he has a book out and a movie out on Netflix years ago. And it's like, for what? It's like, who was he? Like, why was he relevant? Like, is this something that has been manufactured? So it is a very good question for us to ask, as far as who is this person. And perhaps a lot of the ways that we'll find out who a person is by looking at, obviously their actions in the past, but perhaps even more importantly, who they're receiving money from, who's backing them, who's putting them in these opportunistic positions. So I can definitely understand when you have somebody like Candace Owens, if that's the case where she just married her, you know, wealthy in-law family. And, we want to know a little bit more, like, oh, they're into politics. Like, explain this a little bit more. Clearly she was into politics. So it just makes you question certain things. It makes you question them. But let's move on to the next topic. Even when and my apologies, I don't want to blame it on the pettiness of the conversation, but even when we go back and forth and I'm giving a review about Candace and Nick going back and forth against each other, I feel like I'm either saying the same thing that I said yesterday, or if I'm trying to figure out something new to say, it just feels like we're having a petty conversation that doesn't have much substance. But neither here nor there. Let's continue. All right. So I wanted to highlight certain aspects of the conversation around this national defense strategy. Nick was talking about, the power plays in different areas, and he was mentioning this Heartland. So I wanted to read you some stuff that I just, Googled real quick. And it's like what this Heartland means in geopolitics. So this Heartland theory. So the Heartland theory was proposed in 1904 by Halford J. Mackinder. According to the theory, there is a geographically central region of Eurasia, the Heartland, whose location and resources make it the key to global power. Whoever controls that region, the theory argues, could dominate Eurasia and by extension, the world island, Eurasia and Africa, and they thereby control the world. So the idea was influential during major historical periods, world wars, the Cold War, because controlling the strategic landmass meant access to resources, position, and influence. And we heard Nick talk about, access to the seas. Obviously that's very important. I believe we're seeing a lot of those things, how important they are, even with the Israel-Palestine conflict, with different things that have happened where certain food resources have been cut off. It almost goes back to like the days thousands of years ago when you're picking, where your place is going to be, and you're understanding, like, okay, if you're on a river, well, who controls this part of the river? Then they control the entire access. It makes you kind of go back to that. I don't want to call it tribal mindset, but perhaps just look at the world, look at the globe in a way that we don't typically look at it. As far as strategy wise, who controls this region, and they're gonna, by controlling this region, control this sea, control this land, control access to water coming in through this seaport, control access coming in on this train or whatever it may be. I mean, obviously the seas are very crucial. So let me keep reading. In short, heartland power in this sense means geopolitical power derived from controlling a strategically situated, resource rich central landmass. And historically, it's been used to explain why controlling certain regions, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Eurasian interior, matters globally. All right. And obviously, this is a huge issue with that Middle East region. So just wanted to share that with you before we get into the conversation. And the question that I have in when Nick was, going through the Heartland issue was, is the lust for money the root of all evil, or is the lust for power the root of all evil? Because everything that we've been discussing, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's, the Heartland theory, it all comes down to power. Who can be the most powerful country? And obviously that works hand in hand um, with control. If I'm the most powerful country in this hemisphere, if I can control this hemisphere, if I can control the resources in this hemisphere, how they're um, given out to other countries, if I can control the distribution of a lot of these things, then I can be a very powerful country. And this lust for power seems to be the very thing that makes countries violate their principles and tap into our beastly nature. Now, what do I mean by tapping into our beastly nature? Everything seems to be based on, okay, who can be in power, who can be in control? And I guess I'm thinking back to what Nick mentioned on a couple shows ago, but a while ago, when he was talking about Venezuela, I believe, when he says it's only your gold if you can protect it. As powerful as we can become, or as wealthy in a lot of ways, whether that's through our deals with resources or whatever it may be, as influential as we, become, it only matters if we can protect ourselves, if we can protect our country. And perhaps with that level of protection on the defensive side of things, a lot of countries will believe that part of that protection is having a strong offense as well, being offensive, making sure that we have better weapons, better military, more advanced weapons. And when we say more advanced weapons, what are we ultimately talking about? We have to make sure that we have a weapon that can threaten you and yours and killing your people at a greater rate than you have with killing ours, that ours works well, that ours detonates when it lands, all these different things, that ours has an advanced technology to where our weaponry is suited to destroy more lives, to destroy more land, to destroy more resources that in your country than you are capable of destroying in our country. And this lust for power seems to dictate how the world works, and it seems to dictate how we will rationalize our principles and morals. It's not dictated based on any religious scripture. It's dictated based on survival. And even when you look at a lot of these scriptures, it seems that, and I don't want to get into the whole scripture talk. Actually, let me back out of that for a second. When you look at what's going on in general, everything seems to be okay, or everything seems to be rationalized that are based on our country, our tribe's survival. So we can go to lengths and to an extent that otherwise would be deemed inappropriate, not principled, not in, with integrity, a weak moral compass. Morality doesn't seem to play a role or as big of a role when if we can get people to buy into the fact that, oh, well, we're doing this because this is for our country's survival. We need to be as powerful as possible. We need to make sure we can control this hemisphere. So if we need to go into Venezuela and control their resources, because ultimately that's going to benefit us as far as safety of our country, and it's not going to allow Venezuela or any country near us to work with our opposition, and we'll do what we need to do. And this is the same thought process, I mentioned it on yesterday's show, that makes Vladimir Putin, I guess, justified based on that logic to go in and invade Ukraine. If Ukraine's thinking about joining NATO, joining our enemies, then we need to make sure that we're controlling Ukraine. And the only way to make sure that we control Ukraine is to have power over Ukraine. And if that means If Ukraine's going in a direction that we don't like and we need to invade them, then we'll do so. This thought process hasn't worked. And I guess I'm looking at it from a spiritual standpoint. So perhaps the majority of us don't look at it from a spiritual standpoint because we're only looking at it from a power standpoint. So that's why I asked the question, is lust for money the root of all evil or the lust for power? That's the question that I'm asking. And I almost wonder, if I was sitting here talking to God, if I was sitting here talking to some of the messiahs, the prophets, whoever people look up to when it comes to the religious context, if I asked them like, yo, is it the lust for money or is it lust for power? Because really, people, I guess the lust for money becomes a problem when people are lusting it so much because they want to leverage it as power. So is power the ultimate issue here, or do you see the foundation being more so rooted in finances and money? So just something to ask. I'm sure we can look at both and highlight the areas in which both are very dangerous to humanity overall. Um, so Nick mentioned some things as far as believing that white people are going extinct, and this has been something that I did a little bit of research on. I shouldn't even say that I did a little bit of research on, but it intrigued me when a lot of the conversation around abortion, pro-life, pro-choice was happening, I guess, before the election. And it makes sense why, a lot of conservatives want to get rid of abortions. When you look at the numbers, a lot of other people are outperforming white people when it comes to having babies, birth rate. I think I actually looked up some statistics on this. Let me check. Okay, so it says on here, and this is just ChatGPT. So, so it says the short answer is no, white people are not going extinct. Obviously, that's a little bit of an extreme, but that's how I asked the question. But then it says, but yes, in many Western countries, the percentage of population identifying as white or as non-Hispanic white in the US is declining as a share of the total population. That shift results from lower birth rates among white populations, aging, and faster growth of other racial ethnic groups. So this is where a lot of the fear mongering comes into play with, the Muslims are taking over, they're having more babies, they're doing, this is where a lot of it comes from. And with birth rates, especially in America, in various cultures, but just referring to the white population, um, the birth rates are low. So it may get to a point where, other groups are outpacing, white birth rates. So ultimately, could you say that that's going to one day lead to extinction of white people? I guess you could say that. I guess like a lot of other things, it would get to a point, or if it ever did get to a point, and I guess that's what a lot of people are trying to call attention to now with getting rid of abortion. But what I was going to say is, it ever gets to a point where it's really becoming an issue, I'm sure people will rally behind it. I'm sure that'll be a rallying call that perhaps people need to, hey, focus on family, have some babies. So I I uh I get where people are going with that, and I get how that has to be something to be focused on. I focus on it from a bit of a different angle, where it's just, hey, we need to prioritize family. We need to prioritize family. But Nick is speaking, to his point. I don't want to take away from his point. He's talking specifically about white people, to each their own. Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers. Let's actually see. So it says in the United States, as of 2020, as a 2020 census, the 2020 census, non-Hispanic whites accounted for 57.8% of the US population, down from 63.7% in 2010. So from 57.8, or from 63.7 to 57.8 in a matter of 15 years. Okay. And then it says in 1950, non-Hispanic whites made up roughly 89.5% of the population. So a significant decrease nonetheless. So, perhaps it is important to look at the numbers. Perhaps this will, wake people up to saying like, hey, we got to have more babies. And I'm kind of excited about it, I guess, from the standpoint of, I'm hoping that more babies means a greater attention to family. a greater value in motherhood, a greater value in fatherhood, a greater value on the overall nuclear family. So I'm with that. Obviously, don't want people just out here having babies, just out of wedlock, having kids not grow up in two-parent households. But hopefully, this will lead to not only more babies, but more families, and a focus more on families, and a value more on families. So I'm with all that. Let me get back to my notes, make sure that I'm not missing anything. I didn't really have anything that stood out as I was writing my notes. On this one, I actually had to go back and listen to certain parts of the show again just to make sure that I was, I guess what is that? My comprehension was good on it. Let me see. Hold on. Yeah, so I'm not sure. I guess when we look at a lot of this stuff makes sense when we look at all the beef in the Middle East. Perhaps it's not just about the quote unquote holy land. Perhaps it is more so based on this heartland theory. So definitely something for us to look into. I'm not going to just talk y'all heads off. I'm going to let y'all go. I'm trying to look at my notes to see if anything else stood out. I know Nick mentioned in the beginning of the show, the question of, are we preparing for war with China? I would love for us to all get on a page where we're just not accepting from our politicians and the powers that be, we're not accepting war as a solution. We're not accepting war as a solution to fixing problems. When you look at what's happened between Russia and Ukraine, and I know Nick mentioned that it seems like, Trump is looking to cooperate with Russia. And even though they may never be what we'd call an ally, like at least they don't necessarily have to be a top op, and we have to feel like we're in this war with them. So I just, when you look at that particular situation and you look at the things that they're now negotiating with a peace deal and putting things on paper, and then when you think back to the negotiations that they were having before anybody, had a casualty on there, before there was a casualty on either side, it's like we could have addressed this before. Now, hundreds of thousands of people, like, let me say that again. Hundreds of thousands of people have died in this conflict for what? To go back to the same table, to negotiate the same things that people were trying to negotiate or that should have been negotiated before there was a death. But we accept war as a strategy or as a solution. Like, why do we accept that right now? We advance in every other aspect of life except how we handle problems with each other, conflict resolution. Everything else is advanced. We can have flying cars. We can have all this other goofy stuff that we'll create and all this other technology. And I don't mean to call it goofy, but a lot of it is goofy. But we can make all these advancements. However, we can't advance how we resolve conflict. Matter of fact, when you look at that area, we've advanced the weaponry. So not only have we not advanced, but we've gone into an even more beastly type of way of thinking when it comes to that. Now we're okay with people having nuclear weapons. Why does anybody have a nuclear weapon? Now, I may be sounding to a lot of y'all soft, but I'm just not with the whole violence thing. It just doesn't solve anything. It doesn't solve anything. I was having a conversation on live the other day on the show where, we were having this conversation saying, like, what has war ever accomplished? And somebody was like, well, World War II accomplished something. I'm like, yo, I don't know if y'all were aware of this, but I think it estimates between 70 and 85 million people died during World War II. And somebody was telling me that had some type of positive, like, I'm sure you can find something, to say, oh, well, this positive thing happened, but does it really scale or hold weight when you're comparing it to 85 million people dying? So neither here nor there. I don't want to get on this high horse, but I'm just not with the wars. I'm not with the warmongering. I'm not with the bullying. I'm not with the colonizing. It just doesn't do anything. It just puts us in a position where, all of this negative demonic action that the entire world is putting out there, like at some point, this is going to explode.
it's going to explode, implode. I don't know if implode is the right term in that case, because it's a global thing. The entire globe, we're putting out and accepting and being complicit in all of this demonic, devilish behavior. Like, it just reminds me of the same stories that when you read some of the scriptures with the story of Noah and when God was given the heads up, or even with Sodom and Gomorrah, when it's like all this evil is happening. So eventually what's going to happen? We're going to destroy this. Now, whether it's somebody else pressing a button, whether it's us pressing our own buttons, or whether it's just some type of flood, or I don't know, fire and burn, whatever it is, it just seems like we're pushing ourselves in that direction and accelerating when we should be looking to figure out a different way and move in an entirely different direction. So I'm gonna leave y'all with that. This is a review of Friday's show, so I probably won't see y'all for a couple days. But you can tune in with some of the other videos. But either way, appreciate y'all, love y'all. Continue to like, subscribe, turn your notifications on. And like I always say, if I'm wrong, y'all tell me where I'm wrong. I have a bias going into a lot of these things that don't allow me to be as objective as I would like. And sometimes it's just maybe I'm lacking information. Maybe I'm naive or ignorant in a particular area. So y'all let me know. Y'all hold me accountable, and I appreciate it. So on that note, I'll let y'all go. I'll see y'all soon.
It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a nigga on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there. Let's figure out a split that's honorable and fair. Tell me where you trying to take it. Bro, I'll meet you there. 1600 Penn, Wash, DC. Swear I saw the vision riding through the DMV. I envision prayers, but I could do VP. Hillbilly, Elegy, fuck, I look like JD. Shout out my cheat code, Dave and Karen raised me. And my big bro, a nuclear family.
And they don't like that. Strong fathers in the crib, BLM for that. LBJ society created all that. Victimhood mentality, I can't embrace that. And everything they taught in school, assume it's all cap. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Ain't no introduction, just some fun facts. In case you were wondering, I am that.
I know you heard me hit it 3 times for Dr. Umar. Shout out to Umar, man. We ain't kicking nobody when they down. And shout out to everybody that continues to show love, support, appreciating the message that I'm giving y'all, along with the bro Nick's message. We gonna keep pushing, man. And shout out to the haters too, cause y'all in the comments heavy too. y'all the ones that gave me the inspiration to create this song. They kept saying like, who's the random black guy in the corner? I am.